The spotlight is on regulators once again as further details emerge about Bank of America's acquisition of Merrill Lynch. I'm Winnie O'Kelly, reporting for Business Day Live. Peter Evis will be joining me from our newsroom for an update on the situation in Europe. But first, court documents filed last night disclose details about a bank merger at the height of the financial crisis. Joining me now to talk about it is Louise Story, who's been following it from the start. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, what's really interesting here to the public, I think, is that even this many years after the financial crisis, very few people have been held responsible or accountable for what went on. So now we have an example, and this time it's not from prosecutors, but in civil litigation about what went on in the throes of the crisis, shall we say. Tell us what we should be making of all of this.
Well, this is one of the most interesting chapters in the financial crisis. You remember back in '08 and those adrenaline-filled days that Merrill Lynch almost collapsed. It might have declared bankruptcy like Lehman Brothers, but Bank of America came in almost like a savior and bought Merrill Lynch in September of 2008. And everyone knew Merrill Lynch was in pretty bad shape. But what this case, where the documents came out yesterday, what this case is about is a few months later, before that merger closed, because there's always a few months between when you strike a deal and when a deal closes, and the shareholders at Bank of America had to vote on it. It turned out Merrill Lynch was in way worse shape than Bank of America executives had known at first. And when Bank of America executives found out that Merrill was in terrible shape, they didn't tell the shareholders about that bad shape. And so the Bank of America shareholders could have voted against this deal, could have thrown it out the window, but because Ken Lewis, the CEO of Bank of America, and the other executives didn't tell them the new revelations, they had no shot, and it turned out they got really a bomb.
So what's interesting to, I think, the public at large here is we have another example of a financial executive saying one thing to the public and to shareholders, and yet something else privately in memos and now in depositions. He's conceded he knew the losses were much bigger. This sort of goes to the heart of what happened during the financial crisis. But why is this case the one that continues to percolate?
You're right, because in the buildup, when all of those bad mortgages were given out and the toxic mortgage securities were built, there were a lot of executives who privately were saying, these are terrible mortgages. And you've seen the documents that came out with Angelo Mozilla with Countrywide, but publicly, Angelo Mozilla said they were good. So you're right, this was a pattern. But a lot of the cases about creating the bad mortgage securities were really difficult to bring because there was not a clear victim. This case, this Bank of America Merrill case, lives on because it's a much simpler case to bring. It's about an M&A deal, and there are a lot of laws around shareholder protection and what you have to tell shareholders during M&A deals. And so the reason this one lives on, and maybe you'll see some penalties or some fines in this one, is because it just fits into existing securities laws more easily than some of the other egregious acts leading into the financial crisis.
So could we expect prosecutors to follow up, to look at some of this evidence that's now continuing to come into the public eye and do anything, or are we sort of beyond that now? What's the likelihood?
I'm doubtful that you are going to see much in the way of criminal action here or anything from the Department of Justice, because the Securities and Exchange Commission looked at this same case, and they already settled with Bank of America and with the executives, Ken Lewis, the CEO. So if the SEC has closed the book on it, it's unlikely they've passed much along to the DOJ. Now, the Attorney General of New York, Eric Schneiderman, he's continuing this case. It was started under the prior Attorney General. He's continuing it, but again, it looks more likely to be a civil case, so jail time is unlikely. But it's an important case because, again, it raises the question of what do bank executives owe to their shareholders? What do they owe to the broader public? And it came to a head here because, when you listen to Ken Lewis, he's testified about this case in Congress about why he held this deal together, even though it might not have been immediately good for his shareholders. He says the reason he held this deal together was for America. He says that before the deal closed, that Hank Paulson, the Secretary of the Treasury, and Ben Bernanke, the head of the Federal Reserve, put pressure on him to hold the deal together for America. And so you very much in the financial crisis saw these trade-offs constantly about who are you looking out for, the public, the executives, the shareholders.
Or the
homeowners, the taxpayers.
who wound up putting another $20 billion into this deal because of the Merrill losses.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a fascinating chapter in what was an incredible crisis. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you.
Turning now to Europe. Some grim economic data has reinforced the perception that the monetary union is at a crossroads. Joining me now from our newsroom is Peter Evis. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Winnie.
So there's some talk out there that has been for a while, frankly, but today more than ever, after a month of deterioration in Europe, that maybe what we really have to move forward here is not another piecemeal solution, but maybe a grand plan for Europe. Can you tell us what that would look like?
Yeah, in effect, what this grand plan would mean is countries agreeing to give up their control over their own budget, putting it into a central body, so that the Germans will feel okay about putting some of their own money into other countries.
Okay, and now there's some real obstacles to doing this. I mean, one of the things that people seem to want is maybe something like Euro bonds, where together the countries would back some debt issued by others. Maybe some kind of deposit insurance, right, or some kind of additional capitalization for the banks. So Germany and France might provide support for banks in Spain and Italy, for example. What are the obstacles to getting that done?
Well, there are two main obstacles, Winnie. The first is that countries don't want to give up power to a central body. France particularly doesn't want to give up its budget controls to people in Brussels. They have a history of being, very jealous of those things, as any country would be. The other obstacle is, of course, the paymasters themselves. Germany in this case, they want to see countries, do certain things in response to getting rescue funds, and that's something they call conditionality.
So no one expects anything to happen right away, but as things grow worse, in Greece, for example, where it seems to be having trouble paying its bills, and in Spain, where the cost of borrowing is rising, the European leaders are going to meet in a month, roughly. What can we expect to come out of that?
Well, I would imagine that, political solutions aside, which are very hard to achieve quickly,
yes,
you'll probably see the European Central Bank come in and make very large purchases of troubled countries' bonds, and they'll do that under the, they'll say this is justified because we need to stabilize the European economy. When things get really rough, they can always resort to that excuse.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But going forward here, one last step is going to be needed. There's going to have to be some sort of a union, it seems, of a fiscal nature in order to pull this off. That could conceivably take years?
Yes, absolutely, and that's why I think it's really a question mark of whether it'll ever be achieved. You've got to remember that the euro itself is a grand plan. So do we need another grand plan to rescue the grand plan? That's ultimately what we're talking about here. And it just may be too much for Europe to bear. Maybe they don't want to sacrifice that much sovereignty for the next grand plan, and that would be the crunch time.
And presumably anything that's worked out will then come to yet another series of votes in countries, correct?
Correct, and then you're going to have countries seriously debate whether they want to give up certain areas of decision making, and you could have some no votes, and then everything would be set back again. So look, it's up in the air right now. These grand plans are all very well on paper, but once you start putting them to the electorates, they may never get through.
All right, we'll be staying tuned for more of that. That's all for today. Please stay with us online at nytimes.com for our continuing coverage of this and other stories. I'm Winnie O'Kelly, reporting for Business Day Live. Thanks for watching.